instruct to fold 1/2 inch along the cut edge or turn up a 1-inch hem. Now, in my earlier days of sewing, my first inclination was to draw a line, say 1 inch from the edge, and then fold the fabric along that edge. The problem is, of course, that once the fabric is folded over the line, you can't really see it, so it's of no value. You could draw the line on the right side of the fabric, but it's sometimes not advisable to mark on the right side of the fabric. So here's what you want to do. When you wish to turn up, say, a 1/4 inch from the edge, you draw a line 1/2 inch from the edge. Let's see, I'll do that. I'll turn this. I'll draw a line 1/2 inch from the edge, and then I turn the fabric to meet that line, and I have the correct turn up. Just remember this rule: double the distance. When you need to turn up 5/8 of an inch, draw a line double the distance, or 1.25 inches from the edge. Here's a quick tip for a machine sewn hem, and this method is perfect for hemming jeans, a casual skirt, or a top. Here's how it's done. Just turn up the hem to the desired length, then on the inside of the hem, using a ruler and a fabric marker or a soap sliver, draw a line 3/4 of an inch from the hem edge, from here, from the fold, 3/4 of an inch from there. Then trim along this mark, and I've already done that, so that the hem turn up is just 3/4 of an inch deep. Then, to prevent fraying, I've used red thread so you could see this. I finished the edge with a 3-step zigzag, or a medium zigzag does just fine. Then, working on the right side of the pants, or whatever it is that you're sewing, secure the hem with top stitching 1/2 inch from the edge. If it's jeans you're hemming, use either matching navy thread or the gold thread typically found in jeans. And speaking of hems, if you're still hemming pants and skirts by hand, you really should try the blind hem stitch found on most sewing machines today. Can you believe that this was hemmed by machine? The stitches are virtually invisible even though I used black thread on red fabric. What's even better is the fact that a machine sewn hem can be sewn nearly as quickly as a simple seam, and it just takes a bit of practice. I'm going to set it up. Now I folded up the hem, and then I folded back so that it allows the stitches to fall just on the very edge of the fabric, and every 4th stitch or so just barely catches the garment. And of course, practice makes perfect, and most sewing machine manufacturers suggest that the thread tension be slightly loosened for a virtually invisible hem. And this is how it will look on the back. Sewing by machine is always faster than sewing by hand, and buttons are no exception, especially if you use glue stick. First, you mark the position of the button, and if you're replacing a button, just use the thread holes as a mark. But you want to put a dab of glue stick on the button, and I know I have a button. Here's my button. I put a dab of glue stick on the back of the button, like this. And I place it on that mark, and I want to allow a moment for the glue to dry, as wet glue would adhere to your sewing machine needle and it might cause skip stitches. Now this one is already dry, and you set your machine for a zigzag stitch, and you lower the feed dogs so that the machine doesn't feed, and then by hand you want to turn the wheel. I'm going to set it for the right stitch. Now I want to get it set up by hand so that I don't break off the needle by going full force. Lower the feed dog. Okay, I got that. Okay, then after you do a couple stitches by hand, you're ready to sew the button. Now just 4 or 5 stitches are all that you need. And if you wanted to have a shank, I would have positioned this toothpick between the holes before I stitched. And this would make the stitches, would sort of raise the stitches and create a shank to keep the buttonhole from gaping. And here's something your sewing machine can do, and it really has nothing at all to do with sewing. I'll show you how it's done. But first, let me show you the finished project. These lingerie straps are a twisted cord made from narrow strips of tricot. And this cord could also be, this is a cord made from thread, and it could be used in corded buttonholes, and it would be a perfect color match because it's made from ordinary all-purpose sewing thread. And both are created using the twisting technique I'm about to show you. You'll want to cut tricot strips a 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide. You can cut them either on the cross grain for stretch or on the lengthwise grain for a stable cord. The strip should be 2.5 times the desired finished length. If you're making thread cord with ordinary all-purpose sewing thread, you'll want to use 4 strands, as I said before, and the strand should be 2.5 times the desired finished length. Now I'll insert this strip through the center of a bobbin, and sometimes that's not so easy to do. Okay, just down the center of the bobbin hole. Then up, I place it on the spindle, but I want it to be in there enough that it's going to hold. Okay, I get that in there, and it didn't hold that time. If you have difficulty getting this strip to hold, you want to twist it. First of all, you want to trim it so it will fit easily into this bobbin hole. Then you get it in the hole. Okay, now I'm ready to hold it out. Now I'm going to hold it out in a way, and I'm going to depress I'm grasping the end out here of the free end of the strip with my right hand, and I extend the strip up and away from the bobbin spindle, and now I'll press the foot pedal of my machine so that the bobbin spins and in turn twists the strip. Now I keep the pedal depressed until this twisting sort of creates a tension on the strip, and I can feel that tension, so I've stopped. You stop your machine, and then you try to get this bobbin off without the whole thing flying across the room. Now you grasp the center of the strip with your left hand, and I have in my right hand both ends of the strip, and I'm keeping the whole twisted strip taut. Now I've got the bobbin off the spindle. I'm still grasping both ends. I'm grasping the center down here of this twisted strip, and I'm going to hold this doubled twisted strip tautly, and then I release this center, and then you'll see these 2 twisted strips twist into each other. Now it may be necessary to pull the strip tautly a couple times and release it in a snapping motion to create or to obtain a smoothly twisted cord. Now these ends will untwist on the tricot cording, so you'll want to knot them or pin them until they're secured in a garment or in a seam. Cord made from twisted thread, however, remains twisted pretty well. Now besides cord for buttonholes and the lingerie straps I showed you, this technique produces cord to make interesting belts, as in, say, for a nightgown or a robe. And it makes interesting jewelry, hair ornaments, belt carriers, and crafts and trims. You know, talking about sewing, we talked before about drawing straight lines and everything. It's easy to sew straight if you have a guideline, but some fabrics are difficult to mark. I've never liked using a tracing wheel and carbon, but I have several marking aids that make it possible to mark on nearly any fabric. My favorite is just a sliver of bath soap, and the smaller and sharper the better. Soap makes a sharp, highly visible line, but best of all, it steams away with a steam iron without a trace. If it gets dull, just use it to wash your hands. Now, soap does have its limitations. It doesn't show up well on a light colored fabric such as this one, and it may leave a greasy trace on dark silky fabrics. Now, this is a blue fabric marker, sometimes called a spit pen. It disappears with just plain water, and it makes a good line. Now, I don't call it a spit pen, nor do I spit on my sewing, but everything has its limitations, and this fabric marker is not an exception. Be aware that the heat of an iron may set these marks, so you'll want to remove markings with clear water before you press. And the same goes for laundering. Some soaps may set this ink, so do remove the markings before laundering. Now, this fabric marker is really terrific because its marks disappear in 24 hours. You won't need to remove them with clear water. They'll disappear on their own. You won't want to press these markings either because heat may set the ink. And you won't want to mark today and sew 2 days later because the marks you so carefully have made will have disappeared. No one marking tool is perfect for every fabric, but with these three, you'll probably find it possible to mark on any fabric. If you're like me, you try to stockpile sewing notions, which you use often. One of the things I like to have on hand is an assortment of interfacings. I usually buy 2 or 3 yards of several different weights, so I don't have to stop everything and go out to buy enough interfacing for a collar. The problem is what to do with the scraps, and how does one identify the weight after the printed label is trimmed away from the interfacing? Here's a simple solution. Interfacings are usually rolled on a bolt along with a vinyl instruction sheet. After you purchase a length of interfacing, make a storage envelope of the vinyl instruction. Just cut the vinyl sheet and make sure that you have an entire set of instructions. This one measures about 12 inches deep when it's folded in half. You'll set your machine to sew a medium zigzag or a straight stitch. Then you'll stitch along each side to create an envelope. Now you can place the folded interfacing as well as the interfacing scraps in an envelope, and they'll be neatly stored and identified, and you'll always have the instructions at hand. Now, here's a tip that's a real time saver, and it requires no sewing, but it may save you hours in resewing a suit or remaking a garment. Now, this is a double-edged razor blade, and no, sewing isn't so bad that I'm becoming violent. But have you ever had an almost new polyester garment is especially bad? Have you almost had a new polyester garment pill so badly that you didn't want to wear it? Well, this razor is the answer. Now, I know I've gotten an extra year of wear out of several linen poly blend suits because I did this. You can remove the pilling by giving the garment a good shave. Now, of course, you want to do this very carefully. You just shave away the pills. And remember, this is a remedy and not a cure. You'll want to keep this razor handy because you'll probably have to shave again after a few wearings. But shaving your clothes isn't a cure for pilling, but it does greatly improve the looks of a garment that's pilling. Shoulder pads are in nearly everything these days, which is good news for most of us because when your shoulders are broad, your hips become narrow. So, of course, it's only a visual illusion, but no matter. You don't need a set of shoulder pads for every garment in your wardrobe. You can make a pair of portable shoulder pads, and then it will be easy to put them in whatever garment that you're wearing. Removable shoulder pads are especially desirable in a blouse or sweater for convenience in laundering. Or when a blouse with shoulder pads is worn under a sweater with shoulder pads, it's nice to be able to remove one set. Here's how to make shoulder pads removable. Stitch the soft half of a 3-inch strip of Velcro to the seam allowance of the garment right here at the shoulder. Now position the Velcro strip close to the sleeve and away from the neck edge of the garment. Then place the corresponding half of the Velcro on top of the shoulder pad. Now it should be centered so that when the garment is worn, the shoulder pad sits nicely on the shoulder. Just stitch down the center, and in stitching, you'll want to reduce needle tension so that the stitches don't flatten out the pad. Then, when you're ready for a shoulder pad, just press it into place. Then you can add Velcro strips to the seam allowances of as many garments as you like, so you'll get lots of mileage out of this one pair of shoulder pads. And speaking of shoulder pads, here's how to make a set of shoulder pads that can be as thick or thin as you prefer. Now, I like the shoulder pads that I make because they're contoured and follow the curve of my body rather than sit on the shoulder like some kind of a wing or something. And I also like these shoulder pads because they're quick and easy. They require absolutely no sewing. Here's what you'll need to make your own custom shoulder pads. You'll need an 8 or 9 inch circle, and a dinner plate is ideal, or you can make a circle from cardboard. You'll need poly fleece, which is sold with interfacings, and you'll need a slippery fusible interfacing such as Stacy Easy Knit. Now, you'll use less than a yard of each. This produces a sort of one-size-fits-all shoulder pad. For a larger pad, use a larger circle. For a thicker pad, add another layer or 2 of fleece. Fold the fleece so that there are 4 layers atop one another. Now, and these layers are slightly larger than my plate, and I place the plate atop the layers, and I would use a fabric marker to draw around this plate. Then I would pin the layers together and cut along the outline circle, and you can cut through all 4 layers at once. Next, you want to cut down the center so that you now have 2 half circles, 4 layers each. Now, the layers have to be graded so that the pad is thickest on the straight edge. It's going to be thick here and thin down here. The shoulder pad graduates to only 1 thickness of fleece at this curved edge, which goes next to the neck. Now, to do this grading, remove the top layer from each stack and place the circles atop of one another and trim away about 1/4 of an inch. And you can do this to both pads at once, and it doesn't take great accuracy is not required. Okay, then you take the next layer and you cut away. Well, first you want to separate them. Okay, you take 1 off of each stack, and on this layer you're going to cut away 1/2 an inch, and then from the 3rd layer you want to trim 3/4 of an inch, and then the 4th layer you leave untrimmed, and then you stack these graduated layers back together. Now let's imagine that I've already done the graduated layers and go over to my sample here. Okay, I have the graduated layers, and this will equal 1 shoulder pad. And it's, well, this one's this has a couple extra layers because I wanted this one to be extra thick. But they're on this straight edge, they're even, and on the curved edge, this is just a single thickness on this curved edge. Now, here's how to cover the shoulder pad. You want to place the plate atop of that interfacing, the 2 layers of Stacy Easy Knit, and you have 2 layers, and you'll draw a circle and come up with 2 of these. You'll also want to add a 1/2 inch margin so that the shoulder pad cover can accommodate the bulk of these layers of fleece. Then, with the straight edges even, you place the shoulder pad like this, and then you fold the interfacing over the pad so that the interfacing edges are even. Now, this next step permanently molds the shoulder pads to follow the body contours. With the largest layer on top, I pin this to my ham, tailor's ham, like this. Just stab pin it. Then, with a steam iron, you want to lightly fuse so that the interfacing adheres along the edge, closing the shoulder pad and creating a cover. Now you allow the pad to cool while it's still pinned to the hem, and this pad takes on that nice permanent contour. Now here's a tip for a waistband, and it will make it much faster. Now, if you sew conventionally, you probably stitch a waistband on to the right side of your skirt, then turn 5/8 of an inch along here on the waistband edge, and then sit down and hand stitch this to the waistband edge, and it takes a lot of time. Well, the method I'm going to show you eliminates this hand stitching and also eliminates some of the bulk, and no one minds having a thinner waistline. The first thing to remember in cutting your waistband is to cut it on the selvage, and if you don't have enough fabric to cut this waistband on the selvage, you can create your own sort of selvage edge by finishing one log edge of the waistband with multi-zigzag stitching to prevent that raw edge from fraying. Now I prefer a narrow waistband finished to about 1 inch, so I cut this band 2 3/4 inches wide for a 1-inch band. But if you wish to use this method and follow your pattern guidelines, cut the band 1/2 inch narrower than the pattern directs, because you'll only need 1/8 inch of that 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now always interface the side of the waistband which is seen when the garment is worn. And if you're feeling very efficient, you might cut several strips of waistband interfacing so you'll have it ready for future use. I use a ruler and a fabric marker to draw lines for the strips of interfacing exactly the width of my finished waistband, or 1 inch wide. Now this band is already fused, and I take care to fuse the interfacing precisely 5/8 of an inch from the long edge so that I'll have an accurate stitch guide. Now let's assume that I've pinned the band in place and I've already checked and corrected the fit, and now the band is machine stitched in place here. We're this far along if you were sewing conventionally. Next, you want to get out a sewing gauge and your straight pins. And this is a good time to talk on the telephone or watch TV, because this is the kind of thing I take to do while I watch my children's soccer games. Working on the right side, you're going to use the gauge to pin a uniform width of this waistband all the way around. Now if I've sewn and measured properly, let me put a pin in. If I've sewn and measured properly, this band will extend beyond this seam about 1/8 of an inch. Then after pinning, I turn it to the right side and I stitch in the ditch. And I had such a good thread match. I'm not sure that you can see that, but I stitch in the ditch. That is, I stitch in this little well of a seam so that you can't see it either here or on the waistband. And in stitching in the ditch on the right side, I catch the inside edge of the waistband. Now you stitch around the entire band and your waistband is completed, and there's no handwork. It's a good durable waistband and there's no extra bulk, and best of all, it's quick. Now here's another tip that has to do with waistbands. In well-made ready-to-wear, you'll find that the waistbands are usually closed with trouser hooks, and this gives a nice clean look, and it doesn't interfere with a belt as buttons often do. However, in stitching a trouser hook to the outside half, you have to keep the hand stitching. I'll fold this so you can see. If you were putting a trouser hook on here, you would have to keep your hand stitching on the inside so that the stitches wouldn't show on the outside when the trouser hook is closed. And then when it is closed, the two layers pull apart and it looks kind of tacky. Well, here's how to alleviate this problem. Let's assume that the band is machine stitched to the garment and the ends of the band are closed and the band is all pinned in place, and you're ready to stitch in the ditch in order to catch this layer, this under layer of the waistband. Before you do that stitching, insert a patch of fusible interfacing between the waistband layers. That goes right inside there. Now, in the final pressing, these two layers will be fused together and you'll have a much stronger base for attaching the trouser hook. This next tip also has to do with waistlines, not waistbands, but with waistline casings and drawstrings. You know, the kind that come out in every laundry? When my children were small, it seemed that every time I washed a pair of sweatpants or a jacket with a drawstring, it would come out of the casing during the laundering, until I did this. You simply make a few machine stitches, just make a couple tacks at the center back of the casing, and then there's no way that this drawstring can come out of the casing. And speaking of children and their clothes, here's a tip for kids' jeans. When my kids were young, we would go absolutely crazy finding jeans that fit. They were both on the thin side, and it was always very difficult to find pants that were long enough yet tight enough in the waist. If you have a similar problem with your children's jeans and pants, or maybe yours, here's a sewing tip that corrects that problem in about 10 minutes. You'll want to use this when you want to take in the waistline of a pair of jeans but don't want to go to the trouble of removing the waistband, for heaven's sake. On the inside of the band, on the inside layer only, you make a 1/2 inch cut. And I didn't want my elastic to come out. Okay, and I have a 1/2 inch cut on this end as well. Then you measure the distance between these two slits. Then you cut a length of 3/4 inch wide elastic. You'll want to cut it an inch smaller than the distance between these two slits. Then you pull the elastic through the waistband between the slits. And down here, I've used a zigzag stitch to secure one end of the elastic, stitching through the elastic and both thicknesses of the waistband at the same time. Then with the elastic pulled through, I had my elastic, okay, pull the elastic through. You might use a safety pin or something to do that. You'll want to draw it up slightly, and then while the child is wearing the pants, adjust and pin the elastic for a snug waistline fit. Once you're satisfied that the elastic is snug enough, remove the garment, then zigzag through the elastic and both thicknesses of the waistband. Then trim this excess of the elastic, and now you have a pair of jeans that won't fall down. Here's a tip that has to do with waistlines that don't fit. How many sweaters or other knitted garments do you have that seem to grow in wearing? This growing seems to occur most often in cotton knits that lack good recovery or memory. Maybe the sleeves of a sweater won't stay pushed up, or the waistline ribbing stretches out immediately after you put on the garment. Here's a simple solution, and it takes just a few minutes to correct this problem. You'll need elastic cord, and this is easy to find where sewing notions are sold. And you'll need matching thread to match your garment, and if your machine has a foot for raised stitching or perhaps a piping foot, you'll want to use that. You want to set your machine for a long, wide zigzag, and you'll perhaps need to experiment a bit to find the best stitch width. Now, I've already stitched around, but you'll want to stitch around the entire garment with a zigzag stitch, and whether you're working on the waistline or cuffs, the technique is the same. We're going to stitch atop the elastic cord, which is positioned along the edge and on the wrong side. Now the stitches are forming, oh, gotta have your feed dog up. The stitches are forming a sort of casing. Now you want to take care that the needle doesn't pierce the elastic, but that it makes stitches on either side to form that sort of thread casing, stitching around the entire garment. Then you remove it from the machine, and you'll probably want to try it on at this point. Then you'll pull up the elastic as snugly as you like, and you want to tie an overhand knot like this. Because if you tie a simple knot, it will pull out in wearing. So do tie an overhand knot like this. Now this same technique works very well in children's clothes, where a pattern calls for an elastic casing, or for a casing where you pull through the elastic. In the cuffs of this little girl's dress, for example, the pattern said to first sew bias tape casing that takes 2 rows of stitching. Then it says to pull through the elastic. It's much faster to use the zigzag method you just saw. First, you want to hem the sleeve. I used a narrow hemmer, so that was really fast. Then I marked a guideline for the elastic on the wrong side of the sleeve. Then I simply placed this elastic cord on the guideline and zigzag over it. Not only is this faster, but the elastic can be adjusted once the child tries on the garment, and you can tie off the elastic as loosely or tightly as is necessary. I hope you've enjoyed the super time-saving sewing tips that you've just seen, and I hope they will help you to sew better and faster. If you'd like a transcript of this video, which includes diagrams and step-by-step instructions on all the information you've just seen, I'll be happy to send it to you. Just send your name and address to Super Time-Saving Sewing Tips, P.O. Box 39397, Cincinnati, Ohio 45239. And please include $3 to cover postage and handling. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.